All right, should be unmuted now.
Okay. All right, I think we're ready to get started now. I feel like I need a gavel or something to get people's attention. Yeah, exactly. Thanks for joining us in person and online today. We got an interesting meeting. I'm sure most of you have heard there's going to be some changes to the highway capacity manual with the new 7th edition, but might not know what those are. So that's why we have Dan Cook here from HDR. He's their lead traffic engineer. He's also involved with the Iowa section leadership as our student member liaison. I think we have a longer name for him, but I always forget what it is. But he also kind of works with Movite and their student activities group as well. So he's been kind of helping us reach out to the Iowa State chapter. But for this meeting, he's a member of the standing committee on the highway capacity and quality of service, the TRB committee. He's going to tell us a little bit about what is new with HCM 7. So take it away, Dan.
Thank you. Do we get a confirmation that people online can hear us? Just a thumbs up.
You sound amazing, Dan.
My speakers were muted. If anybody said anything, just let us know if you can hear us.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sounds great.
Good call, Dan.
I just imagine getting 30 minutes in this and people are like, when are you guys going to start the presentation? All right. Yep. Thank you for the introduction, Andrew. My name's Dan Cook. I'm with HDR, just around the corner here downtown. Been here for a couple of years, but thank you for attending today. So the highway capacity manual, I'm sure you guys are familiar with. What I want to present on today is the updates to the 7th edition, which just recently came out earlier this year. And yeah, let's just get right into it. I shouldn't block the view of anything. So before we talk about the 7th edition, let's talk about the 6th edition. That was released back in 2016. The major change with that edition was it introduced the reliability methodologies for freeways and urban streets, which was a major change from the previous editions of the highway capacity manual, and along with other changes too. It definitely increased the non-motorist methodologies that are in the highway capacity manual. But a little more background on the 6th edition. So prior to that, you can probably think of HCM 2000, HCM 2010. There was a conscious decision to call this one version 6.0 or 6th edition. And the idea behind that was that it would provide opportunity for chapter updates. Since the HCM was getting so big and there's a lot of research going on, the thought was, all right, so if we have a chapter that has an update, we don't have to come out with a completely new highway capacity manual just because there's a new 2-lane highway methodology or something like that. And the idea would be like version 6.1, and it could be released in either paper copy or electronic copy. So as Andrew mentioned, I'm on the TRB committee for highway capacity and quality of service, and our charge is to produce and oversee production and maintain the highway capacity manual. And we were working on a version 6.1 but then, work keeps coming in, new stuff keeps coming in, we want to incorporate. And TRB ultimately made the decision to just go ahead and release a new edition, which would be the HCM 7th edition that I'm talking about today. And part of the pros of doing that is that they're moving towards a cloud version or a electronic version, and they've been hesitant on doing that up until now, just without having the necessary version controls in place. But that now is available for purchase, the electronic version. You can also buy the paper edition, if you please. It's just going to be a little different. I think you remember how they have the binders that they had before. Now it's just going to be paperback, kind of like the Green Book. So I'm not going to go through every chapter, but the layout of the Highway Capacity Manual 7 is very similar to previous versions where there's 3 different volumes and then a 4th online volume. Volume 1 has to do with concepts of the Highway Capacity Manual. A lot of good stuff in here, especially for like teaching a classroom type of things. I think a lot of people kind of forget about Volume 1, but it has good stuff in it. Volume 2 is all about uninterrupted flow. So that's your freeways, your 2-lane highways, multi-lane highways. I always like to point out the reliability analysis because I think that's something that a lot of people don't know about, and it's a very useful thing for modeling reliability, both on, so in this case, freeways, but also on urban streets in Volume 3. So looking at both the effects of recurring and non-recurring congestion on a facility, and you can model that over an entire year to get not just a snapshot of the performance of facility, but rather a holistic view of what's going on throughout the year and kind of the variations and the effects of different things going on the corridor. So, but I'm not going to dig into that too much in this presentation, but I do like to point that out. The chapter 15, 2-lane highways, I'll get to this one in a little more detail, but that's a completely new chapter. It replaced the old procedure. There was a new NCHRP project that was completed a few years back by the University of Florida. Came up with a new methodology for analyzing 2-lane highways. And yeah, I'll get into those details here in a little bit on what that is. Volume 3, that's all about interrupted flow. So these are methodologies to analyze different modes of transportation on urban street facilities. Again, urban street reliability, looking at specific urban street segments, signalized intersections, stop controlled intersections, roundabouts, interchange ramp terminals, and alternative intersections, as well as off-street pedestrian and bicycle facilities. And then Volume 4, it's kind of called Applications Guide. However, it has a lot broader view than just an Applications Guide. These are chapters 25 through 38, and these are, at least up until now, they were always available for free. You didn't have to have the HCM to access these, but these are online. Things like hcmvolume4.org, or you can Google HCM Volume 4 and get to these chapters. So these generally contain supplemental material that goes along with the kind of the core methodologies that are in Volumes 2 and 3. They also contain sample problems, some fully worked problems, so you kind of look at the workflow of working through an analysis. It also contains some information on, that last thing, network analysis. That's new. That's a new chapter. And I think it's interesting that it's in Volume 4, but basically it's a completely new way of looking at how freeways and surface streets interact with each other. And I'll get into those details here in a bit too. All right, so the name Highway Capacity Manual kind of gets the idea that it's all about highways, it's all about vehicles, but really and you'll notice this in the name, it's the Guide to Multimodal Mobility Analysis. So it looks at more than just the vehicle mode. There's methodologies that look at the pedestrian, bicycle, and transit mode as well. And also, it's more than just level of service. Obviously, HCM methodologies are used to obtain that nice level of service letter score, but it's a whole lot more than that. There's a lot of stuff in the background. There's tons of performance measures that can both be estimated and measured using HCM methodology. So if you're doing a performance-based practical design type of analysis and there's certain performance measures you want to estimate for future work to be done, like planning level estimates, look in the HCM. There's tons of performance measures in there to look at. So as mentioned before, the TRB Standing Committee on Highway Capacity and Quality of Service is charged with overseeing production and maintaining the Highway Capacity Manual. I serve as a member on that committee, Anybody can become a friend of the committee, though. Not necessarily everybody's involved with TRB, but you don't necessarily have to go to TRB meetings or anything like that to sign up to become a friend. I didn't put the website on here, but you just go to mytrb.org. You can search for committees. You can sign up to be friends, and you'll just get inundated with emails. I mean, it's not that bad, but so I just wanted to give a little bit of background on the committee. So we're structured with 5 separate subcommittees. There's 3 basic, I say, more technical subcommittees. Those are those first 3. The uninterrupted flow subcommittee, they of course look at all the stuff in volume 2 related to freeways, 2-lane highways and multi-lane highways. Interrupted flow, that goes more into the volume 3. I'm very active in the interrupted flow subcommittee. That's kind of, and I'm also leading the working group on signalized intersections. So that's kind of my main focus on things is in that area. I won't go through each one of these. The applications subcommittee, that I'm also involved in that. That's the subcommittee that's more looking at how is the HCM being used by people like us sitting in this room, practitioners. So that, of course, there's a lot of people that look at the highway capacity manual other than us in this room. We're mainly consultants or practitioners, people working for cities as well, public agencies. But there's also teachers that look at the highway capacity manual for content to teach in a course, as well as researchers that are either using highway capacity manual methodologies in the research that they're working on, or they are actually doing research that will be used to produce material to go into the HCM. And then last, I want to point out this task force. This just convened about 6 months ago. It's a special task force on HCM future directions, and I'm involved with that. And basically what our charge is to look at who are the main users of the highway capacity manual. I think we can all recognize the fact that probably not, and maybe none of us actually pick up the highway capacity manual and look at it. We're using it through software tools. So either they're vendor products like, this is not a comprehensive list, but Synchro or HCS or different other software programs that have programmed in the highway capacity manual methodologies. We use that in our jobs. So anyways, the task force is looking at, okay, so how are people using this? How can we improve kind of the layout of the HCM? Because we also have professors that come and say, I can't teach material out of the HCM anymore. It's become too complicated. Yes, a lot of it has become too complicated, and a lot of it requires tools to do. So kind of just identifying who our core users are and how can we modify the HCM to meet their needs. So I've borrowed some slides with permission from a session that was given at the TRB annual meeting this past January down in Washington, D.C. The session there was named What is New in the 7th edition of the Highway Capacity Manual. And I borrowed some slides from that. And I did want to recognize the presenters of that session, the people shown here on the slide. They also conducted a lot of the research that went into the major changes in the 7th edition of the Highway Capacity Manual. So Dr. Bastian Schroeder, Dr. Bazad Agashi from University of Florida, McTrans Center, Fabio Sasahara, from University of Florida, Dr. Tom Creasy, who is the outgoing chair of our committee. He's with Caliper Corporation, Paul Rias with Kittleson Associates, and Dr. Scott Washburn, who's a professor at University of Florida. So also a credit McTrans Center at University of Florida. They produced a lot of these slides that went into this session. So just want to give them some credit too, but I'm not going to go through. I pulled out slides that I thought would be good to talk with you guys about today. Probably a little late for an agenda slide since I've already started, but as stated in the title, overviewing the changes of the HCM 7th edition, but then also looking at upcoming NCHRP projects that are either ongoing now or will be starting soon that will influence the HCM in the future, and where are we going from here. talked a little bit about the 6th edition that was released in 2016. This just gives a little history of the highway capacity manual. I myself I've not seen a copy from before 2000, but there's still people active on the committee that were involved with coming out with the 3rd edition in 1985. So it's always interesting hearing their perspective on things. But the 1st edition came out in 1950 from the Bureau of Public Roads. And then going forward from that, it's the Transportation Research Board has kind of been the owner of producing the highway capacity manual. And as time has gone on, it's become more complicated. There's more chapters, more methodologies. It's also become more of a multimodal look. Before, it was all about highways. It was about capacity on highways. It was about the motor vehicle, and it's a whole lot. There's more things out there. There's more modes. So that over time, I think definitely starting in the 2010 edition, it became more robust on, and then going into the next few editions, more robust on the non-motorist methodologies that are in the highway capacity manual, which that kind of, well, I'll skip the slide for now because I do want to just get right into it. So speaking of non-motorists, kind of the first big change in the 7th edition is the enhanced pedestrian volume estimation and evaluation method. So this came from NCHRP Project 1787, which influenced a lot of the pedestrian methodologies that are sprinkled throughout the HCM. So, like I said before, in HCM 6, there were already methodologies and metrics that looked at the pedestrian mode on urban streets, signalized intersections, two-way stop control intersections and mid-block crossings, and off-street paths. So a little bit of overview on the two-way stop control intersections and mid-block crossings, so uncontrolled crossings is what that falls into. In HCM 6, the level of service was based on pedestrian delay, and that level of service was sensitive to hourly traffic flow rate and motorist yielding rate. So again, keep in mind these are uncontrolled crossings, so it depends on motorist yielding to pedestrians. This new method in the 7th edition, it's based on it's more of a, think of it as a quality of service, the vantage point from the pedestrian, the percentage of dissatisfied pedestrians. It's satisfied pedestrians, but mainly we're trying to get at what's the perception from the pedestrian using or crossing the roadway. And that level of service sensitive to hourly traffic flow rate, AADT, again, motorist yielding rate, but also specific crossing treatments at uncontrolled crossings, such as marked crosswalks, median islands, rectangular, rapid flashing beacons. The delay is still calculated and is sensitive to the pedestrian, but there's also some corrections that were made to the motorist yielding procedure that was in HCM 6. Now moving on to signalized intersections, that level of service was kind of based on a pedestrian level of service score, which again, think of that as like a quality of service, the perception to the pedestrian. So obviously delay is part of that, but there's other facets that go into determining that level of service score. In HCM 6, that delay was estimated for just a single stage crossing. And if you had multiple legs that you were crossing, it was just simply, you would take the sum of the delays on each one of the crossing movements, add it up together, and that was your delay. In HCM 7, that delay is now looked more holistically at multi-leg, multi-stage crossings. That delay calculation recognizes the fact that as you're, and you can kind of look at the graphics here, I'm looking at this intersection out there watching people cross, but you're going from one corner to the other, you're going to be crossing multiple legs, and it's not, you don't randomly arrive at that second crossing. There's a pattern to it. So it recognizes that, pulls that into the calculation for pedestrian delay. Level of service continues to be based on that pedestrian level of service score. And it also includes looking at, more unconventional crossing maneuvers, definitely things we don't necessarily have here in Des Moines, but other big cities do, like a barn stance or pedestrian scramble where you're crossing diagonally across the intersection, or just complete exclusive pedestrian movements at the intersection. So moving on to the urban street. So HCM6 had a method for looking at the segment pedestrian level of service score, and that was influenced by kind of how easy it was to cross the street between the signalized intersections, but it wasn't really sensitive to how far a pedestrian had to walk out of the way. So like that graphic on the left side of the screen, that's kind of showing an example. If you're in between intersections and you can't cross right in the middle, you got to go down to a signalized or a marked crosswalk and to get to your destination. That's something that has been added in, so that level of service is more sensitive to how a pedestrian has to go out of their way to get to their destination. And it also includes the effects that mid-segment signalized crossings have on the pedestrian level service. All right, so that's the end of the pedestrian part. Moving on to the next subtopic, the capacity impact for connected and automated vehicles. So, I mean, it's not news to anybody, but as we start looking out into the future, middle part of the 21st century, later half of the 21st century, connected and autonomous vehicles are going to have an influence on the performance of our roadways. We don't quite know what it's going to be like. We don't know how many people are going to have this kind of vehicles, but we know it's going to happen. And now agencies are making decisions, planning level decisions for things in the middle part of the century, even going a little past the year 2050. So the research that was conducted, well, let me step back for a second. I think we're all fairly familiar with autonomous vehicles versus connected and autonomous vehicles, but just to, again, clarify that definition, when we talk about autonomous or automated vehicles, we're talking about vehicles that they're performing in isolation. So it's a vehicle that can drive itself, it can maneuver around, it can read things, but it's not communicating with other vehicles. It's not necessarily communicating with the infrastructure. It's just doing like what we do as human drivers. We're just driving. Connected and automated vehicles, or CAVs, that pulls in that extra communications component where vehicles are communicating with vehicles. Vehicles are communicating with infrastructure. And that's where we really see the shorter headways, the increase in capacity of the motor vehicle. And that's the focus of what I'm about to talk about here. So there's this research that was conducted. It was part of a NCHRP pooled fund study. The team produced capacity adjustment factors for freeways, signalized intersections, and roundabouts. And I'll go in those in a little more detail. But you're going to find that, for example, the freeways capacity adjustment factors will be located in those supplemental chapters. So in this case, chapter 26. But I think I've already kind of spilled the beans on this. But the what we're talking about here is what's the effect does CAVs have on capacity, and those are being then brought into the procedure as capacity adjustment factors as a function of market penetration rate. And market penetration rate is a term that we use when we're talking about what percentage of the vehicles out there are CAVs. And as time goes on, obviously we can expect that number to increase. To how fast it's going to increase, I don't think we quite have a great idea on that. Obviously, a lot of it depends on it's a factor of the automotive industry and their technologies that they're producing. It's also a function of how fast the public buys those things as well. So what was produced also along with those capacity adjustment factors are planning level service volume tables. So rather than talking about them, we can look at them. So the first part, capacity adjustment factors for freeways. I wasn't on the research team. I can't dig into all the the techie stuff in this, but I do like the graphs that came out of it, and it's kind of cool. So this graph up here, this is capacity adjust or CAV adjusted capacity on the vertical axis, and then market penetration rate on the horizontal. So you can see there's 3 different levels. Each one of these lines represents a base capacity. Again, we're talking about freeway segments. As the market penetration rate increases, and this is all, the research that was conducted was all simulation based, very rigorous simulation. As that market penetration rate increases to 100, it will converge to a certain point. And that makes absolute sense, because when you have all your vehicles out there are CAVs, they're all operating the same. So today, our freeways, the capacity, a lot of it's dependent on the human driver and how they position themselves. As they're more constrained, they tend to drive slower. They also tend to have larger headways, so that reduces capacity. Obviously, CAVs aren't as sensitive to those things that the human driver is. So this table down here is what is presented in the highway capacity manual. These are those capacity adjustment factors as a function of both market penetration rate, so these 0 to 100, and the adjustment segment capacity. So this would be your kind of your base adjustment or base adjusted segment capacity from your highway capacity manual procedure. And then what is the factor that you have to multiply then to see what your adjusted capacity is based on how many CAVs you have out there. Again, this is a very beginning look at the impacts that CAVs have on capacity. This is not a holistic approach. This is more just meant for planning levels as agencies start to look at and making decisions for things 30, 50 years from now. What am I going to need in a facility for it to operate at a decent level? And so with planning level items, you're not needing to dig into the nitty gritty details of, necessarily looking at this little weave segment I have here. It's just more holistically at the freeway facility. Again, these are those service volume tables I was looking at. So this is just a planning level estimate on, and I think this table is showing daily maximum service volumes for a basic freeway with some other given assumptions. Obviously, I'm not going to read through all the assumptions there, but you can get the idea. Obviously, we had an idea in our head as professionals that yes, CAVs will probably increase capacity. This gives it a little more quantitative, how much is our CAVs going to affect capacity? How much is going to increase capacity? So the CAV capacity adjustments for signalized intersections, the committee, we're still kind of voting on these. I don't believe that they're in the HCM7 now if you pick it up and look at it. But this looked at what's the effect that CAVs have on saturation flow rate at a signalized intersection. And what was found in the research was that it does have a pretty profound impact. Today our base saturation flow rate of 1,900 passenger cars per hour per lane. As that market penetration rate increases, we will see an increase in that base saturation flow rate. That makes sense, right? I mean, when vehicles are communicating with the infrastructure and they have a green light, you don't have the human driver waiting 2 seconds and then going, or you don't have a human driver looking at their phone or not paying attention. Everything's going to be flowing more simultaneously. You're going to have that increased capacity. And then again, planning level service volume tables will be provided for signalized intersections. There's a lot of caveats in the assumptions that are made here, but again, very good for just high level planning applications. And then lastly, the capacity adjustments for roundabouts based on a market penetration rate. That I think the main thing to conclude from here is that generally CAVs help increase capacity at roundabouts. There are certain cases where it lowers it a little bit, but I can't really get into the technical details on what the research team found, but it's basically all on that follow-up headway factor. If you're really interested in looking at more of the research, I can get you in touch with the team that did it to get the results if you want to dig into it further. Again, these are just showing those capacity curves for roundabouts. And I think the general thing, you just look at this, is it just generally shifts the curve to the up and to the right, which makes sense because that's as your capacity is increasing with CAVs versus your conflicting flow rate. So if you have a higher conflicting flow rate, higher market penetration rate, you should still see an increase in capacity. All right, next part I want to talk about is the new two-lane highways method. So I'm not going to get through into all the details here, but if you're familiar with the methodology, it basically looks at a single segment. So you can sit down, look at a two-lane highway segment and analyze the performance of it from the motor vehicle perspective. And it was a function of a lot of different things. You could even look at passing lanes as well and the effect that that has on the performance of a two-lane highway facility. What this new methodology does is, rather than just looking at it segment by segment and leaving it up to you to kind of look at the performance of each segment and make sense of how they interact with each other, it actually, there's a segmentation component to this methodology, and it's sensitive to passing zones, passing lanes, areas where there are no passing zones, and the effects that that has on performance. There's changes in how heavy vehicles are incorporated into the methodology. If you've done two-lane highway procedures, you know that the performance is heavily dependent on heavy vehicles. The performance measures or level of service measures that are for two-lane highways are generally related to the how often a vehicle is following another vehicle. So if you have a lot of heavy trucks, that tends to degrade the performance of a facility. Before an HCM6, heavy vehicles were incorporated into the methodology using passenger car equivalents, so it was more of an indirect way of incorporating percent trucks. But now in the new methodology, trucks or percent heavy vehicles a direct input into the performance measures. There was an adjustment factor in the old methodology. And when I say old methodology, I'm talking about HCM6, but the two-lane highways methodology has been around for a long time. It wasn't just came out in 2016. It's been around for a long time. I can't tell you when, but I'm pretty sure it was the 80s or 90s. There was a adjustment for grade that was in there, but now it's the vertical alignment is now addressed in the new methodology and some different classifications that are more of a function on how long the segment is and what the slope percentage is, both upgrade and downgrade. The old methodology had no sensitivity to horizontal alignment. However, in the new methodology, there's a way to incorporate the effect that horizontal alignment has on the performance of a two-lane highway. The exhibit that's shown in the lower left, this was the service measures or the level of service table for two-lane highways that you have probably seen in the last several editions of the HCM. And it's dependent on, you have three different classes of highways, and each class of highway has different, actually different service measures as well as those thresholds for level of service. That's all changed in the new edition. We don't have those three different classes of roadways. It's more just divided between higher speed highways and lower speed highways, but also the performance measures are different. And the new performance measures follow over density, which kind of gets at how many people on your two-lane highway are in that following mode. Because obviously that has a huge influence on how a driver perceives the performance of a facility. I'm just going to keep going on here. So the base free flow speed, there was no specific guidance for estimating what this is in the current methodology, but the HCM7 it provides a little more guidance on how you would estimate that. There's also I think people have different names for this kind of facility. 2+1 configuration, that's where you'd have you see these a lot more in Europe, where you have a rural highway with a 3-lane cross section with alternating passing lanes. Some states may call them Super 2s. It depends on where you're at in the United States and what they call them. But that was never talked about in the HCM before, but now there's some initial material giving some guidance on how to estimate the performance of a two-lane highway that has that 2+1 configuration with the alternating passing lanes. And then I think the last thing here is facility level of service. There's some stuff included on if you're looking at more of a longer stretch of two-lane highway and looking at it more as a facility level. However, there's an ongoing NCHRP project right now that is developing a methodology for actually performing a facility analysis on rural two-lane highways. So that would basically bring in, all the intersections, different segments of two-lane highway into one holistic analysis. Just a little bit of overview on the changes in Chapter 15, the two-lane highways methodology. Again, if you've looked at this in the Highway Capacity Manual, and I know I've heard professors talk about this is always difficult if they're teaching it in their classes. A lot of the lookup tables in there require interpolation to get adjustment factors. And some of it's three-way interpolation. So the new lookup tables, the way that they're set up, there's no interpolation required to be able to use this or perform this methodology if you're not using software for it. It now treats trucks explicitly directly into the methodology. A couple things to highlight here. So the effect that no passing zones have on the facility is now, I think before you used to just say, yep, X% of the roadway is in a passing constrained or percent no passing zone. So 40%, that would be an input. But now, since it's segmentation based, and each segment is either a passing zone or a passing constraint, that's not really something that you have to input. It's already accounted for in the methodology. And I forgot to mention this before. So we're talking about the new performance measure on follower density. This replaces the old performance measure of PTSF, which is percent time spent following, which was difficult, if not impossible, to measure accurately in the field. So if you're trying to perform a calibration of a model, is very difficult because it's very hard to measure. And so that new performance measure, there's guidance given on how you would measure that in the field if you are performing a calibration of the model. All right, next part. How am I doing on time? Are we going until 1:30 or? Okay, well, we got plenty of time. New active traffic demand management method for arterials. So in HCM 6, there was a chapter on ATDM on freeways, and it was limited to freeways. Now in chapter 17 and 37, which already exist, ATDM analysis is added to those to the urban street facilities. And these primarily focused on three strategies: dynamic lane assignments, reversible lanes, and dynamic turn restrictions. And these are conducted through a reliability analysis, which I talked about a little bit before, probably go in a little more detail here, because I, again, think it's something that is highly underutilized in a methodology, in the Highway Capacity Manual. But reliability analysis, travel time reliability analysis looks at the effects that both recurring congestion have on the performance of facility throughout the entire year, or it can be up through the entire year, as well as non-recurring sources of congestion, such as weather events, crashes, fluctuations of demand throughout the year, especially in more, think of ski areas that see huge traffic demands during certain parts of the year versus others. I think next slide might go in a little more detail. Yeah, so in HCM 6, when you're looking at kind of the effects, so adding a reversible center lane, you would do that by performing a single period analysis on an urban street, and you get a snapshot of the performance of that time. So if you happen to be looking at the AM peak performance, you're looking at that over general basic conditions for a 15-minute or an hour period, or even in a single day. But with this new ATDM analysis using reliability, you can look at the effects, like I just mentioned, recurring and non-recurring congestion have. That would include traffic demand fluctuation, weather conditions, crashes, other incidents. And when you're looking at that fluctuation of performance throughout the entire year. You get a more distribution, a better idea of how reliable is a facility. Are you, you might it might operate great under normal conditions, but when it performs bad, when you have rain, when you have crashes, its performance may get really, really bad. And that's where travel time index comes into play, that TTI. And I could give a whole presentation on that, but if you're not familiar with, some of the reliability metrics, I think FHWA has a great web page to kind of describe reliability analysis, how you can use that in your work, and some of the performance measures that go along with that. All right, then this is the last piece I'm going to present on today of kind of the big new things that are added into the HCM. And there's a new network method. And this is the last chapter. I think it's chapter 37. Oh, no, chapter 38. It's in volume 4, and this is based on NCHRP project 1557. What this project set out to do was to look at what effects do freeways have on crossroads, because currently in HCM6 and before, we look at freeway facility as an independent item. We look at streets as an independent item, but there's really no interaction. And we know that there are interactions, especially in areas that see a lot of congestion, where you would have spillback happening a lot from arterials onto freeways, or congested freeways backing up onto arterials. So what is that interaction there between those facilities? And also, how can we estimate the travel time with all those conditions? This kind of gets into what I was just talking about, how the current method before HCM7 looked at the interactions. You would look at an urban street. So imagine you had you're going from here onto I-235, going 5 miles and exiting on 63rd Street, for example. You would look at to estimate travel time or performance, you would look at urban streets separately, then you look at your freeway trip, and then you look at your last urban street trip as well. But you just add up those travel times together. Any interaction between the two would never be accounted for in the analysis, and that's what this new method gets into. So the first part is it includes a Q spillback analysis for freeway on-ramps. This includes the effect that ramp metering has on delay, or effect on travel time, that is, not delay, even though it involves delay with it, but it's all about getting the travel time. If you have freeways that are over capacity, so basically that merge point, if it's more of a choke point, what's your spillback from that going to be if your demand is over your capacity? And you might even have, insufficient storage at a ramp meter as well. And so what effects is that going to have when that spills back into the crossroad intersection, or the crossroad ramp terminal? Next part is looking at freeway off-ramps. This might be a little easier to conceptualize, but you have a crossroad ramp terminal that's backing up onto a freeway. That's going to have a major effect on the performance of the freeway. I think we've always known that, but it's been hard to quantify deterministically what that effect is. And so I kind of like this graphic because it shows, you have the spillback happening, but it actually has an effect upstream on the freeway. You got a lot of people jockeying around, changing lanes, a lot of sharp, I call it turbulence, but a lot of quick merging, and that decreases freeway capacity immensely. And this procedure accounts for that, especially as dependent on the number of freeway lanes that you have. So part of that Q spillback analysis for freeway off ramps, of course, it's all about what is the performance of in this case, I show a stop sign. It could be a signal to, what's your storage? Is that queue going to extend back into your freeway? But also you might have a couple different regimes on how, and my little graphic here showing, but I think you can get the idea over here where you have, your exit only lane, but sometimes you might have a or a just typical diverge area, but you might have a lane that is exit only lane approaching the ramp. So as it spills back, it kind of has different effects on how it's going to degrade performance of the freeway segment. So that's all accounted for in the methodology. So again, ultimately, I'm not going to run through this example, but the main idea is before you would look at, your urban street and then freeway and then urban street again. If, we're talking about this kind of analysis where you'd have origin and destinations were off the freeway, but you'd use the freeway in your trip. You would look at those separately, add up your travel times, but you would really never get at what is the interaction between those two, especially if you have queue spillback or ramp metering. And then I think the last part about this method too that it looks at is changes in analysis periods. So generally an analysis period is 15 minutes long. So if you had a trip that was longer than 15 minutes, you'd be making some basic assumptions on, volumes are going to pretty much be the same. Even though my trip's longer than 15 minutes, I'm still going to be looking at it in my, you say your PM peak volumes or whatever, but HCM7 does a better job at looking at multiple analysis periods, and in this method takes advantage of that for longer trips where you have different 15-minute volumes and your performance is going to change. That trip eventually will lapse into your next analysis period, so it accounts for that and the changes in volumes and performance for the subsequent analysis period and any residual cues that might be from the previous period. So that's pretty much it for updates in HCM7. There are other things that have been updated, and I believe in chapter 1 of HCM7, it goes through all the specific items that were changed. So there's a lot of things on errata that were updated, some interpretations that people had questions on that were clarified. Those things were also updated. I'm not going to go through all of those, but a lot of those things, the things I talked about today came out of funded research, but there's a lot of work that the committee does out of volunteer time to, people will send emails on how do I interpret this, and then we do work on either addressing that through fixes in the text. Maybe there's some errata that need to be changed. So those are things that we do on the committee, is make sure that we address those things and give those things to TRB so they can incorporate those into the next edition or update of the highway capacity manual. But there's always has been, and there always will be research projects that will influence, in this case, the highway capacity manual. These are some of the projects that are ongoing right now. I believe all these projects are either just wrapping up or they're just starting. I don't think there's any that are future projects that are listed on here. So that first NCHRP project's obviously going to have an influence on, again, more of the non-motorist modes, methodologies that are in the highway capacity manual. That second project, 726, I think just finished. In fact, it may be published already. I don't remember. But that's basically is a redo of the merge, diverge, and weaving methods that are in the highway capacity manual and fixing some of the, I don't know if you've ever done a weave analysis on a 12-lane freeway, the results really don't make sense. So it gets at more of those unique situations, and I think we're probably seeing more and more in the United States as roundabouts. This, I kind of mentioned this already, NCHRP 8135, reliability and quality service evaluation methods for rural highways. I'm actually on the panel for that. So I'm not on the team, but I'm kind of overseeing the project from the panel side. And it's kind of a cool project as it's looking at rural facilities. That's something we don't really have in the HCM, especially here in Iowa. It's important because we have a lot of rural highways and a lot of freight movement that happens on those highways. So we could do an analysis and look at, just your general performance of those two-lane highways, but what is really the reliability of those highways, especially as you start to factor in the effects that driving through a small town has on freight movement, or your occasional stop sign out in the middle of nowhere, traffic signal, or whatever it is. So that's looking at that stuff holistically. And then that last project guide for ICE, or intersection control evaluation, will likely have some influence on the HCM. And I think that one just got kicked off. Last thing I'll point out too. So we talked about HCM. It's getting more complicated. It's harder to do. I don't think any sane person sits down and does writes down and does a problem or an analysis using HCM methodologies. We all use some form of software one way or another. But a lot of people don't know about the Planning and Preliminary Engineering Applications Guide, or the PPEAG. This was produced around the same time as the 6th edition of the HCM as a supplement, or to complement the HCM, to perform medium to high level analyses. I like calling back of the napkin type of analyses, where you don't need to do a full-blown HCM analysis for every traffic analysis that you do. A lot of times these planning level applications are great for the work that you need to do. So I just wanted to advertise this again. This is free. They download it from NCHRP. It's also on the HCM Volume 4 website. It's NCHRP Report 825. If you do traffic analyses and you don't know about this, I recommend just taking a look, and you might find a way to incorporate this, and it's a whole lot easier to do some quick analyses that may be more appropriate than doing a full-blown analysis using the HCM. But with that, that kind of wraps up my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and are there any questions? John.
Hey, Dan, those people that are interested in becoming a friend, you kind of explained that, but what's the next step? How do you get actually more friendlier, I guess?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So for those on the phone, the question was, I mentioned about becoming a friend of a TRB committee. You can go sign up on mytrb.org, find the committee that you're interested in becoming more involved with, becoming a friend. But the question was, what's the next step? And that, obviously it depends on how active the committees are. This committee is fairly active. The Highway Capacity and Quality Service committees are pretty active. So we see the list of friends, and when we have, I think the first step is we have interim meetings, especially since COVID, we've done a lot more online stuff. So our productivity has actually increased because we have these virtual tools where we can meet, once a month rather than twice a year. But anyways, those invites are generally sent to the list of people that are signed up as friends so that they can attend those meetings. There are opportunities to volunteer, such as reviewing papers for TRB. That's a great way to get more involved with the committee. And then, of course, we have generally committees. In this particular committee, we meet every year at TRB annual meeting in Washington, D.C. in January. But we also have a mid-year meeting. And this year is going to be June 21st through 23rd in Washington, D.C., where they're more workshop based, but we also conduct committee business as well. So those are more in-person opportunities, but I feel like the virtual opportunities are becoming more out there for more virtual participation. Chris.
I just want to mention also, I think a lot of the committees, not all of them, have increased their number of young members, under 30, under 35, something like that. Good opportunity. Go to the meeting, be active, ask questions, also get some attention, and if you're under 35 or whatever, they might just ask you.
Yeah. So for those on the phone or on the Teams meeting, so TRB committees are definitely trying to increase their membership of younger professionals, and that would be professionals 35 or younger, which unfortunately this is my last year, so I lose all those benefits of being a young professional, I guess. But they're also looking at increasing more diverse members. So I guess I didn't really give a good background on that. So committees generally are made up of members that are appointed, and a lot of that is based on, how active you are in volunteering, and generally there's a limited number of members in a committee. Some committees don't have limits, some do. But then there's no limit to being friends on the committee either. But yeah, I think the general point there was that committees are looking for more membership from increasing their diversity as well as increasing membership with young professionals. See any questions from people on the phone?
I got one for you, Dan.
Okay.
In your work, as you've been involved in this committee and stuff and working probably with some much bigger metros and stuff like that, are you starting to see anybody asking, requiring, some of this ped and bike analysis to be completed alongside the traditional vehicular stuff that we all have been doing for a long time with, impact studies and things like that?
I'm not really seeing it. I guess the people in the room hear that question. It's just more about, are we seeing more of a trend of people requiring, looking at, doing those pedestrian, bicycle methodologies and traffic analyses? And honestly, no, we're not seeing that. I'm not seeing it from my side, and a lot of it has to do with a lot of people don't know it's there. Part of that is, HCM's we're not going to put out commercials on TV for people to learn about it. I think it's just a lack of communication, lack of understanding what's really in there for analysis. So, to short answer your question, no, I don't see that increasing. I think it should, but it's not. And, yep, Stephen.
The Fed been a thought of that. Have you seen in your committee, what's the number of agencies like city or state who use market penetration of CADs making their future planning? Like, have you noticed? Have you done any surveys on that, or do you have an idea about our people starting to put that into their 20-year plans?
Yeah. So the question was, are we seeing agencies using market penetration rate of CAVs in their long-range planning efforts? And I think that was kind of the impetus to this pooled fund study that looked at creating these capacity adjustment factors. Was there are agencies out there asking the question of, as I'm making these plans, what should I be planning for with CAVs on the horizon? And I don't know specific agencies other than I know Oregon DOT, they've been looking at that. I'm sure other agencies have too. I just don't know. I'm not as involved with that facet of work, but short answer again to that question is yes, there are agencies that are looking at market penetration rate. I just don't know to what extremes they're looking at that, other than just initial asking that first question of what effects is this going to have on my infrastructure and how should it affect my planning? Any other questions? Yeah.
With the other research that finishes up, is the current plan to release like an HCM 7.1, 7.2, or should we just wait 6 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. The question was, so with the new research that's coming out, should we plan or look for a HCM 7.1 or 7.2, or is there just going to be an HCM 8? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I would expect, though, I kind of hope that it would go again down that route of not inundating users with a whole nother edition, but rather look at, especially as the HCM becomes more of a virtual item, it would be easier for us to update chapters at a time rather than coming out with a whole new edition. So, but yeah, I don't really know what the future is. I just kind of what I hope it's going to be. Any other questions from people on the phone? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Have anything else to add? So thanks to those of you who joined online. For if there's anybody that you think would find this interesting, invite them to the next meeting. You can also go to Iowa ITE. We're trying to get better about recording these meetings and posting them to our YouTube page, which we have linked there. So trying to bring ourselves into the 21st century and make things accessible for all our members, even if you can't be here the day that we have the meeting. So thanks again, everyone. We'll hope to see you at our next meeting sometime in April. We haven't set a date for that yet, but we're cognizant of Movite next month, as well as I think ITS Heartland is the week after. Yeah, Stephen. Yeah, that's a good point. I mentioned at the start in Dan's introduction, he's our representative to the Movite Student Activities Committee, and also kind of in that role, it makes sense for him to kind of be a student chapter liaison for us with the Iowa State chapter. So it's kind of a non-voting board position, but he's kind of part of all our board discussions and emails and everything. And just yesterday, Marcus Januario, who I hope I pronounced that right, he ran for secretary last year. Tim's our secretary, but we wanted to kind of reach out to him and keep him involved. And we're having a membership chair to reach out to different aspects of our membership, whether it's younger members, members out in Eastern Iowa that we haven't been able to connect with quite as much. It's kind of a new role, so we're gonna try and find some useful things that he can do to try and recruit planners, that kind of thing. So just kind of overseeing our membership, trying to help it grow and maintain what we've got going on, and kind of continue to provide what we can for people going forward. But
Yeah, I was going to add too, I don't know if Marcus is on the phone, but he's also a member of this TRB committee on highway capacity and quality service too.
Small world, right? Yeah, John?
Oh, so
Oh, and
the audience.
I'm pretty sure they could have heard you from back there, but
That's true. I just wanted to make mention, a couple things on the international IT front. The annual meeting for International ITE will be in New Orleans. Starts on the 31st of July and runs into the week of around the 3rd or the 4th of August. Registration is active. The technical program framework is on the ITE website, and so you can register now. I look forward to seeing you in cool New Orleans in August, hurricane-free New Orleans in August. So that is that's coming up. You also, the spring conference was held last week by ITE. You can still, if you didn't happen to register, there were over 715 people that registered for that meeting. You can still register to get the recorded sessions. This was innovations or innovative solutions that were out there and actually are in place. That was the general theme put on by the technical committees and conference and councils of ITE. So that is out there for you, and look forward to seeing you at Movite in April, and then as well as Movite, don't forget that, in the fall. Right, maybe we should mention also the Iowa section will be hosting the Movite spring meeting next year, and so we are looking for people to help. We're just not going to have Brian Wilhelm and John Witt do it all. Well, maybe we will, but we would like to have other people to help supervise them. So the more the merrier. Spring meeting will be hosted by the Iowa section. And I think that's all.
Well, we have to recognize John Davis and his winning the election of international vice president. I should have mentioned that at the start, but just a quick recognition for that. Yeah, it's great that he's so involved in ITE. We're very thankful to have him here in the Iowa section to keep us up to date with all the international things. And I don't know how he has time for everything that he does, but somehow he manages. With that, we'll see you at our next meeting. Keep an eye out for an email from board@ITE or board@iowaite.org. If you have any coworkers or people that you know that are ITE members, make sure they have that whitelisted so we can make that our kind of consistent communication point for you guys. We'll see you next month, hopefully. Thanks.
Basically. Thanks, everybody.